Rima Basharnitsan, the founder and CEO of Dialogue. Welcome to 10 by 20, a series of 10 questions discussed in 20-minute dialogues with local and international leaders doing visionary work at the intersection of people, technology, and society. Welcome back to 10 by 20. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Stephanie Lepp. Stephanie is a producer whose work strives to hold up a mirror, inviting us to grow from what we see. She's the executive producer at the Center for Humane Technology, the organization at the heart of the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. Welcome, Stephanie. So excited to have you.
Thank you, Rima.
To you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
No, and I'm curious. So we usually kick this off as I like to do all my interviews in some way, shape, or form connected back to our childhoods because that's where all the things are born, right? So tell me about how you grew up and who's mostly influenced your work.
Let's see. I mean, I think when I think back to my childhood, there seems to be kind of a common theme that very much shows up in my work now. And that theme is one of integration or synthesis, like integration of different ingredients. I'm a Mexican Jew. Both my parents are both Mexican and Jewish. So, we make matzo ball soup, like tortilla soup. We add avocado and cilantro and lime and chili in it. It's really good, by the way, if you want to make a really, really good matzo ball soup. But there was already some kind of integration there of Mexican culture and Jewish culture, and growing up bilingual, and like noticing early that different languages had different words, which therefore gave me different concepts. Like there are things that I could that Spanish gave me, like words that didn't exist in English. I noticed this very early. It's like, oh wow, these different languages are different ways of thinking, and I get both of them. And maybe also just, I'm just kind of thinking about integrate. My dad is in tech. My mom is an artist turned yoga teacher. So there was that. It was kind of like head, heart, body. Yeah, and now, and as we talk more, I mean, this theme will come up. There's definitely kind of a common thread of just like being thankfully endowed with different ingredients that I then get to mix together or synthesize or integrate.
That's amazing. And I wonder too, like having your own kids now, kind of how you're seeing that whole cloth weave together.
Doing it. I mean, I'm raising my kids bilingual. My husband is trained. He's a family doctor who's also trained in emergency obstetrics, and we had 2 home births planned. Wow. So we are, he's like trained in the absolute emergency situation in the hospital, and we chose to have both of our births at home. So, I mean, if we had to go to the hospital, obviously we would have, but I absolutely see it in my life, in my work, in my home, in the way that I'm raising my kids. So it's,
That's so interesting. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So, was there like one parent over another that you feel you're more like, or has had more of an impact to your role, like as an artist or as a producer, or as I feel like your whole being is really like synthesis and processing and like and making sense of things that are happening in culture, and that just translates as output in different ways. And I feel very similarly about some of the work that I do and think about as well. So it feels very like I can relate to how you are. But I'm curious, like one parent or another was mostly like, as you think about your work now, who kind of comes up for you?
Yeah, I think they both both in different ways. My mom definitely was the source of just creative liberty. Just do it however you want to. I mean, she just brought a bunch of doors from a junkyard home and just put them all around the house and let us draw all over them so that we could like have the experience of just drawing on, kind of drawing on the walls, but without drawing on our own walls. She, at one point when we were at we were at summer camp, she just decided to paint the entire. She invited a bunch of friends over, and they painted the entire kitchen red,
Mhm.
orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and glued the paintbrushes to the wall. I mean, so she's definitely a source of just like do it however you want, and then painted the entire outside of the house fire engine red with a purple door. This is the house that I grew up in.
That's
So, so she's definitely a source of. I mean, and I just gave you kind of more examples from art, but that's also just kind of her. Like she just kind of like does things the way that she feels like it, and that and my dad is more of a source of. I mean, so many things, but I guess what's coming up now is he. And this is actually something my husband noticed about my dad that I hadn't. My dad
Mhm.
really listens to me. Like he takes my ideas seriously and he learns
Mhm.
from them, and that is I feel like that is maybe somewhat rare or very special
Very.
for
Mhm.
my dad to be kind of like learning from me, and that is yeah, that's just a good lesson to me. It's like the lessons can come from anywhere. The learning can come from anywhere, even if the people are younger than you or your progeny or so
Mhm.
that is yeah, so yeah.
That's true, and I
Doing
think
it whatever way and lessons can come from anywhere.
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think also it's really rare because I do agree with you that lessons can come from anywhere, but I think a lot of like my parents, for example, have a hard my mom has a hard time learning from the younger generation. She's kind of resistant to like things, but that also keeps her from being relevant. So it's really nice to hear
Mhm.
that he's able to sort of like let his guard down consciously or subconsciously and actually just engage because that's really how you
Yeah,
stay curious, right, and aware of what's
totally.
happening. I want to be like that.
To
That's my goal.
Yeah,
Is
me too. No to self. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like these little people come along right when we thought we had it all figured out, and they just
oh
like
my god, no.
chaos all over again in the brain, and like that, like, thank God, like we can kind of, think of that as like, oh, they're just rebelling, or we can think of that as like, actually, they're shaking things up for me in a way that like I should be doing on a not totally regular basis, but like, you know, every year, every 10 years, every 20 years,
I
So
mean, talk
yeah,
about
thank you for shaking things up. Huh?
totally. Also, like talk about mirrors,
Yeah.
right? Like the kids are
Oh
just.
yeah.
I mean, yeah. I feel like I am a completely different person, and this I'm like the same and completely different at the same time. In the
Mm,
after I had my daughter. So tell
yes.
me, is there like a really like one big question that you think about all the time? Or do you feel like your work is sort of an amalgamation of a lot of different things that kind of weave together? Or maybe it depends on the project.
I mean, right now, the question that I am sitting with is probably something like how to I mean, it really goes back to integration and synthesis. It's
Mhm,
something like how to articulate a synthesis perspective or a synthesis position, and just to give a super concrete example, um, right now, I think the statistic I just heard the other day is that 62% of Americans want sensible abortion rights.
mhm,
62% of us, the majority of us.
mhm,
And yet, that is absolutely not what we're going to get. That's not what we're getting legislatively. And that's also not what we're getting in terms of the narratives that we hear, the dominant
mhm,
narratives in the media, right? And so, what is that? What is that actual moral majority perspective? How do we not just understand what it is, but articulate it in a way
mhm,
that can mobilize the actual majority that exists? And
mhm,
some of these people who believe that, by the way, some of them might call themselves pro-life
mhm.
and still believe that there should be, under some circumstances, some rights to abort. So yeah, the question I'm sitting with um, is this, yeah, right now, and I'm kind of experimenting with it in different ways, but how to articulate, how to integrate the the best of what the different perspectives have to offer on any issue, and
Mhm,
it doesn't only have to be political issues, but how do we articulate an integrated perspective
mhm.
or a synthesis perspective? But
Yeah,
more broadly, I mean, what is the question? I mean, the question the specific question has definitely changed from project to project, but the big question is probably something just about how human consciousness evolves.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the integration piece is really interesting, and the synthesis piece is really interesting to me in particular, just because I think about how siloed the thinking is collectively. Like if we look at the world and how like media has shaped our perceptions of things, and like I think there's been a few conflicts over the past year politically that I've noticed, such a drastic like one or another, like a complete
Yeah.
polarization of what's truly needed to like bridge a huge gap that could actually be bridged if we just stopped assuming things. And
Mhm.
it's I think what your work does is basically closes that gap, right? It's actually like bringing the most amount of information to the thing that you're most curious about, and then you decide what you want to do with that information. But the idea is that the synthesis and integration actually is part of that. What you digest, what you get curious about. That's my perception of it. But so to me, it's actually the question is, yeah, I love the how you posed it. Like the evolution of human consciousness is so true because there's so many levels of that too, right? There's like
Mhm.
because I think the polarization, or if not to go into the politics side of it, but the polarization really it's like just one little bit. There's a whole different like,
Mhm.
vertically. There's so many levers that go going down and up, and like we could like the more we know, the more curious we get, the more we explore, the more like information we have at our hands to be able to then like make decisions, change perceptions or create perceptions, whatever is necessary. And most importantly, I think changing behavior or having an impact on human behavior in some way is super
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like how would one go about identifying, I mean, just to bring it back to abortion, identifying the perspective on abortion that the biggest ideological diversity of people could get on board with. I don't know. But yeah, to that there's
Yeah.
like a like what is the what is the actual perspective that the you know that the biggest ideological diversity of people will be, that might actually be, that I mean, per this statistic, that might actually be the majority, but we don't even know what to like, we don't know what to call it, because to your point, it's like we're split into the tribes. There's the pro-life
Mhm.
tribe and the pro-choice. Like, what is this synthesis tribe that is actual the majority, that is actually the majority, that would just, that maybe needs to be right reflected in the mirror so it can kind of precipitate out a solution, to mix way too many metaphors. But
Mhm.
yeah, and I mean, that's part of my understanding of what even evolution is like, it's kind of um like bringing the best of along, like, I
Mhm.
mean, there's a term from integral theory: transcend and include. So there's some
Mhm.
things that we just transcend and we just leave off the table. Slavery, done, off the table, forget it. But there's some things we want to bring along with us in this, let's say, evolutionary process, or the evolution of consciousness. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So much. I mean, I feel like we can like so many different directions to go in and sort of think about. Um, Is there like one thing that you love about that you most like get excited about when you think about either the big questions you're asking or the work that you're doing, whether it's producing or other things? What do you most love about that?
Um, I love I love making new things that have never existed.
Mhm.
And I guess with something like synthesis, because it's I mean, that's kind of the name of the game, is like, is creating a new integration that has not existed. So, um, yeah, but in general, I love making, period. Um, but yeah, so I mean, making something new, so right now, I mean, and maybe I can just give a more specific example. So I have been playing with using Venn diagrams as a very simple tool a simple but powerful tool to integrate the different perspectives on political issues. So if we're just going to stick with abortion for a second, this is very crude. I'll give a simple example, and then I'll give an abortion example. So simple example: Michael Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant musician, sexual predator.
Mm-hmm.
They totally coexist. Neither cancels each other out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can both like admire the majesty of his music and like abhor his sexual predation. And that's
Yeah.
just like, you can be here. You can be at the center of that Venn diagram. Okay, so now if we were to get a little more complicated, abortion. So the way that I do it is I give two. This is very crude, so forgive me, but I give two circles to the right, two circles to the left, and I try to articulate the steel man perspective, not the straw man, like the steel man perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just take abortion for a second. So first circle on the right would be life is precious.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that the right is bringing, that it's like, oh yeah, totally. Life is precious. It's like, by the way, remember that when we're talking about guns and climate, but like, yes, life is precious. So that's something, yes,
Totally.
we want that on the table. Circle number two from the left would be something like sovereignty over our bodies is a foundation of freedom. Yes. Okay. Circle number three from the right, over time, a fetus becomes more human. Yeah. Like, I'm not saying life begins at conception, but
Mhm.
what I will say is, like, yeah, over time, like, time matters,
Yeah.
like the first trimester, or the first couple of weeks versus the last couple, there's like an
Mhm.
important difference there.
Yeah.
And then let's say the last circle from the left would be something like, yeah, and life does not conclude at birth. Like, a human life should be supported over the course of their lifetime. Like, okay, so
Mhm.
let's also talk about healthcare and education and everything that a human would
Mhm.
need. But like, that's so what I've been playing around with. So that would be, and then you can be here. You can be at the intersection of all of those. And actually, none of those circles even mention abortion. It's just the values. It's just kind of the like
Mhm.
articulation. So something that I'm playing with now is I'm I'm imagining a video series, that would, it's like, who is your favorite actor or actress? Who do you love staring at?
Uh, oof. Who do I love staring at? Depends on what age I am. But for some reason, the only person that comes to mind right now is Brad Pitt, but he's not my favorite actor.
Oh, that's great. Brad Pitt is beautiful. Who does not love
He
staring
is,
at
but
Brad
he's not
Pitt?
my favorite
Perfect.
actor.
Thank you. Okay, Brad Pitt. I mean, Brad Pitt on abortion would be a little. Okay, whatever. Let's run with Brad Pitt. Okay, so
Okay.
Brad Pitt's face lit up from the right. Life is precious. Life is a miracle. Every human has a right to the life that they were endowed with. Face lit up
Mhm.
from the left. Sovereignty over our bodies is a foundation of freedom. If we did not have sovereignty over our bodies, we would be slaves. And the lighting goes back and forth until, like, face lit up from the front, and Brad Pitt is just like articulating a synthesis perspective on abortion. Like, I have not seen that. Like, what excites me about something like that is, like, I don't see that much content that is actually doing that kind of work of really trying to integrate. A lot of what I see out there is playing for one tribe. So it
Mhm.
excites me to like create something new, like create some new thing that could make some room for us to go in like a new and more unified direction.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's true. I feel like
Brad
they,
Pitt
I
would be great.
agree with you. Or the synthesis might be happening, but it isn't transparent enough to see. So you kind of do still think that whatever is being said isn't, it's not coming to the center, right? It's still kind of on one end or another. So
or
that is
it's or it's
like,
both sidesist, or it's just like,
yeah.
and we gave the mic to this person, and we gave the mic to that person, and now we're
Mhm.
done. And it's like, but where does the integration happen? Like, like, I we need to listen to each other. That's great. And also, like, and then what? Right?
Yeah.
You mentioned action. Like, if we listen to each other without actually like creating some kind of integration,
Mhm.
then we just hurt each other, and we're still acting in different, like moving in different directions.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Totally. No, I know. I relate to that. Relate to like your frustration with that. I understand. When do you, in all of this, right? All of this, when do you find the time to think about all these things? And like, when is that, like, when do you feel most creative as you're kind of You're going about
I
your day.
mean, I live in a semi-permanent state of creative anguish.
Yes.
The time it's not that I find the time, it's that it's just it's like a fire hose. It's just constant I mean, my best friend from high school calls me a tortured artist, and I actually get a tiny bit of relief from that because it's like, "Oh, I guess, like, there's an archetype for this." Like, I'm in a lineage of many, so it's less that, like, when do I find the time, and it's more like it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. How do you track all the ideas? Do you have, like, a
I
place where
actually
you, like,
have Google Docs and Word docs and journals. Oh, I have lists and lists and lists. Yeah, which I
amazing.
didn't realize was unusual until Rebecca, our mutual friend, Rebecca Lendl, asked me actually a couple weeks ago. She was like, "Wait, do you actually have these ideas, like, written down, like, in documents?" And I was like, "Does are you asking that because, like, not everybody does that?" And she was like, "Yeah." She was like, "70, no, that's no, not everybody
Yeah,
not
that's
everybody has
no, I
that."
mean,
So,
I get ideas all the time. I
yeah,
mean, I'm
they're
not
kind
an
of never
artist.
ending.
Yeah.
What?
I said I get ideas all the time, and I'm not an artist per se. I'm terrible at writing them down. And then I remember, oh, I had that idea. What was that thing? What was I thinking? And I have to like go on a drive. If I'm already on a drive, let's say, like
Mhm.
that's when the things start coming back. Or in the shower, like
Oh,
those
when you're driving.
moments that are in between.
Yeah.
But when are you? If you think about the day span, what works for you from like like are you constantly creating, or are you like in the morning is like your best time to like execute on things that are in your head or on in the Google Doc? Evening,
Oh,
night.
yeah, I mean, definitely are you familiar with the big rocks, the little rocks
Yeah, mhm,
framework?
yeah,
Yeah. So, well, for folks who so if you're gonna if for folks who aren't familiar with this framework, I actually do find it very helpful. Let's say you have big rocks, little rocks, and sand and a bucket. How are you gonna fit like most of that material
mhm,
into the bucket? You start with the big rocks, and then you
mhm,
put the small rocks and they fit in the cracks, and then you put in the sand, and then you really, as opposed to
yeah,
starting with sand and then there's not room. So big rocks in the morning always. Start with the big
mhm,
rocks. Yeah, I have more energy and it's like the whole day is ahead of me. So it's
yeah,
like I can really start with the big rocks and then little rocks in the afternoon and sand after the kids go to bed. So yeah, that's
I know, that's all we have time
all
for
that.
is sand at the end of the day. Sand is at the end of the day for
Yeah,
sure.
but that's fine. Sand is
Yeah.
easy. It's like smaller tasks.
So are you ready for a rapid fire?
Sure.
So when do you feel most connected to others?
Probably when I am lost in deep conversation and or on the dance floor.
Mm, cool. When and where are you happiest?
The same when I'm lost in deep conversation and or on the dance floor.
What's your greatest regret?
It keeps changing. Right now, like as of yesterday, it might just be something like so I was at Stanford at the same time as like a very well-known, amazing philosopher, and I started studying philosophy, but they had him in a different department because they
Mhm,
had whatever analytic
mhm,
philosophy split up from so I never encountered him, and I feel like it would have been such a great I very much regret not
yeah,
Richard Rorty for anyone who
yeah,
knows him.
cool. Mhm.
As of yeah, but if you ask me what my biggest regret is next week, I'll say something else.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah,
What's the one thing you wish to pass down to the next generation?
a sense of agency.
Mm. But anyway, thank you so much. This has been such a fun 20-minute interview.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Dialogue's 10 by 20 interview series, where we ask 10 questions in 20 minutes to profile international leaders working at the intersection of people, technology, and society. That's all for today's episode. Like and subscribe below to get notified for our upcoming interviews. Follow us on Instagram at dialogue_co.